Welcome back. In today's video, I'll rewrite our comments section to be more like a social media updates or wall section and continue with the data modeling strategy that I started in the previous video. But I think I'll also have to introduce a few other concepts along the way, like making method calls from templates. So to get started, I want to do a little bit of cleanup and setup to make everything easier from that point on. The first thing I wanted to do was to change how we handle sessions, and instead of using the username as the main session key that they have to be logged in, I'd like for it to be the user ID, which is going to be that primary key that we used in the previous video for the users. So I need to change it here in the middleware, and I also need to change it in the routes, because here in this login post handler is where it actually gets set for the first time. But at this point, it doesn't have access to the user ID. I'll pretend like we have the user ID, and then we need to figure out a way to get that into here. So a good way I see is with this models.authenticateUser method, we can go ahead and open that. See, here we have access to the user object, and then we kind of just throw it away to return only an error. So one way to do this would be to modify this method to return a pointer to the user, in which case on this error here that pointer will have to be nil, and then down here it'll just return two objects, the user and then the error message. So with that, we can get the user object from this call. But that still doesn't get us the user ID. So we don't have a method to get the user ID, but it's easy enough to implement. And this is going to return an int64 because it's an integer key, ID, and int64 is a valid method. So that should do it. And now I just have to grab that user ID, which also comes with a potential error. Get ID and handle the error. That would be an internal server error, because in that situation Redis is probably down. And there we go. So the next part I want to work on is changing comments to be updates. So we have this concept of a social media update. So I'll start by just changing the file name. Call it update. And I want to change the template as well. That looks good. Go ahead and change the route. Here I'm going to call it the body when we get this update from the post handler, because we're going to have an update object, and we want to think of this text that's being posted as the body of that update. So This is just an easier way to handle it. We'll say post update now, and we'll pass the body text to it. And here we'll change this to updates and just say get all the updates, and then pass those to the template. So if we go back to our new update model, change these methods. Also change the Redis keys. Make these updates. Change this to be the body. But I'm actually going to implement a data model for this that's a little bit better than just these two methods. So I'll do type update struct. And this is going to be exactly like we did the users in the previous video. So the updates have a key, which is a string, and this is the key into Redis to get the attributes from the update. There's going to be a constructor, which is probably going to be faster if I just copy and paste this. So we've got this new update constructor, and updates now are going to have two attributes really. They're going to have a user who is the one who posted the update, and then they're going to have the body, the text of the update. So we'll have user ID instead of an actual user object. It'll just be that int64 key for the user, or the primary key, the ID for the user. And then we'll have the body, which is some text. And this now returns a pointer to an update rather than a user. And similarly, when we increment this key in Redis to get the next ID, it's going to be this key now, so that we're working with an update ID. And a lot of this is going to be the same. Like the update is going to have its own unique key, which is update : and then the integer ID. We'll open up a pipeline just like before, set the ID just like before, but now we'll say user ID is the user ID that was passed, and body is that body that was passed. And then actually we need to push onto a list. I'm going to steal that from there. In fact, I'm just going to empty that method because we'll be rewriting that in a second. So add this to the pipeline with the ID. So now our updates list, which is like our stream of updates, right? It has the IDs instead of the text for the update. And with that ID, you can go in and get these attributes for that update. So that looks good. Then here in post update, we're going to actually need there to be a user ID included. So we need that to instantiate this object. So we should be able to just throw away the update that's returned because we're not going to use it, and then grab the error and say new update user ID body, and basically just return the error at this point. So that looks good. The next thing we'll want to do is focus on the routes, I guess. See, here we're going to need that user ID. It shouldn't be difficult though. I think we can just grab the session. There's definitely got to be a better way to do this. I'll probably focus on that in a future video. But for now we can just grab the user ID from the session. That's actually going to be untyped because these sessions hold interface, they hold empty interface objects. So we're going to have to do a type assertion here and say user ID OK equals untyped user ID, assert the type to be int64. And if it's not okay, we've got ourselves an internal server error because somehow a non-integer key got put into that session, and I can't think of a scenario where that's possible other than maybe corruption. So that's just going to be an internal server error. But after this, we have that user ID key that we wanted. So that looks good. I guess the next part is just to deal with these updates in the rendering section when the index is returned. So what does that look like? This isn't going to work because they're not arrays of strings. If anything now, the update should probably be an array of updates. So I guess first we'll do basically this. It'll be the update IDs and potential error. So handle that error, which would probably be a Redis connectivity error at that point. No updates, but there is an error in this case. So now we have all these IDs and we'd like to convert them into update pointers. I'm gonna create the updates, allocate that space. And it's of this type of array, and we already know how long it's going to be because we have these update IDs in an array. So we'll just make this the same length as that array, and then we'll just fill this in with these update pointer objects. That shouldn't be too hard. So we'll say I and the ID for the range over the update IDs, and then updates I equals this pointer object. The key, we'll need to create the key with thump.sprintf update. So in this point, or in this case, this returns a list of strings. It returns an array of strings as the IDs. They're not integers because this result command doesn't have any integer array method. So we have the strings and we don't need to do that string formatting that we did before. So now that I'm looking at this, that's all it is to do the key. we should be able to just return these updates. That looks right. So the next part, we've got these updates in theory, and we need to send them to the template. Well, the template right now pretends that they're just a string. That's definitely not what we want. We're going to need some methods on these updates. Let's go ahead and define some methods. So func update, pointer to an update. So this is a method on the update object, and the method will be get the body, which should return a string and a potential error. This is going to be really similar to things we've already done here. So it's basically this. When we got the username, we were getting this string, which is an attribute of the user hash in the Redis database. And in this case, we're going to get the body, which is an attribute of this update hash. Exactly the same. We can make the next part a little bit more convenient. When we need to return the user, we could return an actual user object instead of just a user key. So we need to get an int64. Well, we already did that here. So I can copy that code, paste that. We don't want to return it. We want to say, hey, this is the user ID, maybe an error. So now we've got the user ID, and we want to return a user object. It's dawned on me that we don't have a getUserById method. That seems like a pretty obvious method to have. So getUserById, and then that's going to take an ID, an int64. It's going to return a user, maybe an error, and it's basically going to be this. And this can actually just return from that method now that we have the ID. Yeah, that looks good. So now this can, oh yeah, we should probably handle this error. Which returns a nil user, but whatever error occurred, probably a Redis connectivity error. And yeah, now we can just return getUserById, pass in the user ID. So now we have methods to get the user and the body out of our update, and we can get our list of recent updates. It's only the most 10 recent, which we'll expand on that later, because we can have multiple lists for updates. Right now we have just this global list, so we have like this global wall or update stream. But if we use different keys and we're pushing those updates to different keys, then we can create these different streams of updates. So maybe one user has their own stream, and I don't know, anyone who follows them might have a stream that we're going to push updates to if we implement some concept of followers. I guess the only thing left to do now is to go to this index template and figure out how we need to do the template portion. So in templates, method calls don't require parentheses like they do in actual Go code. So this will actually call that body. And if body is a attribute, not a method, then it'll just use that. So it's kind of a convenient way to work with these things. So for each update, we're going to have this div, and there's going to be a top div, which is going to be in strong, and it's going to say, hey, get the user, and then off of that user that it gets, it's going to say, hey, get the user name. So this is going to give kind of a title to the update. And we can sort of just add some text. We can change this however we want, but for now it'll just say the username. So if I'm logged in as Davy and I make an update, it'll say Davy wrote in this title section, and then it'll have the body. Oh, that should be get body. And so this works because the loop is iterating over an array of updates. So for each update, we can call getUser because we have this getUser method that returns a new user object. And then on that user object, we can call getUsername because in our user object, we have this getUsername. And you might notice that we're totally ignoring the errors returned here. And that's okay. The templates actually allow you to ignore the errors. If you wanted to be a little bit more cautious, you could create a new structure that just has this data and no potential error. Deal with the errors in the handler. That'd probably be a better approach, and then just use that data structure in this template. But for now, I'm just going to use direct method calls, throw caution to the wind, and ignore any potential errors. The errors that would happen here would just be Redis connectivity errors. Not that they aren't a problem, but let's ignore those for now. More important would be to probably give this a run real quick and see if we messed anything up in the process of all this. So go run main.go. Yeah, I would have been surprised if all those edits didn't have some kind of error. So the first error is that fumped isn't defined in the update.go file. Oh, that's interesting. So we need to import fumped, and then it looks like I returned the wrong type for one of the functions, and then it looks like I didn't return an error in one of the functions. They're all in this new update file. So let's go address those. The first one is just that we forgot to import fumped. That one's easy. The next one was here because I copied and pasted all of this code and left the user literal here, and it should be an update. And the next one was because I forgot an error and it was right here. This function obviously expects an array of updates and an error, and I just tried to return the updates. I need to return nil along with the updates. So now let's see what we got. We go back to here, try to start it again. And yeah, it looks like we're gonna get it this time. So let's go to the browser and see if we can do all of our normal tests with this. So I can log in. Our template's obviously updated because we see updates. I'll do the first comment, and there we go. So now our updates have this little header, a little title, and then the body. Well, that's it for this video. In the next video, I want to show how to use Gorilla Mux to do path variables. And that'll basically allow us to do URLs that are like /Davy and then have all of the updates for the user Davy. Bye!